Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get started? So thank you all for joining us today for our May installment of SCF's webinar series of 2021. My name is Joel Binstock, and I'm the Manager of Originations and Partnerships here at SCF, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Steve Campbell, who is our Operations Manager. Today we're going to be focusing a little bit about solar for nonprofits and municipalities and other governmental entities, and a little bit about why solar PPAs are the best financing instruments for those types of customers. So with that, let's get into our agenda. We have quite a few new attendees to our SCF webinar series, so I'm going to start with a little bit about sustainable capital finance and explain a little bit about how we do what we do. We'll next go into why solar has been an increasingly popular decision for nonprofits and governmental entities to pursue. We'll also discuss the different types of financing solutions available to those types of customers, and we'll break down power purchase agreements in depth. We'll also identify some of the challenges facing financing solar for nonprofits and governmental entities, and explain how we use creative solutions to address those through our PPA process. Steve will take us through several case studies highlighting some of the best work that we've done to address some of these challenges head on. And I'll explain at the end how we can sign up for a power purchase agreement or get registered on the SCF Suite, which is our cloud-based proprietary software that enables PPA pricing. And we'll finish up with a standard Q&A session. So with that, let's jump in. So a little bit about sustainable capital finance. We're a third-party PPA financier for commercial and industrial scale solar projects, typically projects 250 kilowatts and up. We specialize in working directly with solar developers and energy consumers to finance the development, design, procurement, and construction of solar systems. We provide power purchase agreements, locking in the cost of power for a long time, typically 15 to 30-year terms. System ownership and maintenance is removed from a nonprofit's responsibilities, and additionally, SCF can monetize the tax benefits associated with the federal investment tax credit and depreciation, thereby allowing for a lower cost of energy being passed through to a nonprofit entity. And speaking of nonprofits, why are nonprofits and governmental entities pursuing solar? Well, there's several reasons, some of which are listed here, but they could really be broken down to sustainability commitments, cost security, cost savings, and then community-wide leadership. The types of entities that are good candidates for solar include golf and country clubs, community centers, schools, religious institutions, munis, irrigation districts, wastewater treatment plants, typically entities that are paying at a minimum over $75,000 in electricity bills per year across all their electrical meters, and traditionally owner-occupied or those with long-term lease agreements. In terms of the options to finance solar, there are several. There's the traditional ownership model, which is structured typically through cash purchase or using a debt instrument like a loan. There are also the lease type structures, one being an operating lease and one being a capital lease. The only difference is that an operating lease allows for the use of the asset but does not convey any ownership rights. And the third option includes both power purchase agreements and community solar solutions. Community solar offers customers an opportunity to purchase solar energy along with other customers from the same service territory from a centralized solar installation. The agreements are very similar to power purchase agreements, and these solutions are typically best candidates for customers that cannot host a solar system on site. Now let me go ahead and break down a power purchase agreement in a little bit more detail. As I mentioned earlier, a power purchase agreement enables a third-party financier to own and operate a system and provide the benefits to the customer. The customer will receive power from the system and secures a reliably lower rate than they're currently paying with the utility over the length of the PPA term. They get to obtain all the system benefits, but they do not own the system array. The electrical utility continues to provide uninterrupted electricity service throughout the length of the PPA term and are responsible for the interconnection approval process. In addition, if net metering is enabled, they will allow and be responsible for providing the net metering credits. Sustainable capital finance will work directly with our solar installer partner to develop and finance the project. We will be responsible for processing all the incentives as well as be responsible for system performance and maintenance throughout the PPA term. So let's identify some of the challenges hindering the abilities of nonprofits and governmental entities to pursue solar, starting with market and project economics. While the cost to install solar has decreased dramatically over the last 20 years and the cost of utility fed power has increased, commercial scale solar still faces economic and market challenges mainly caused by the following reasons. Number one is a low cost of utility fed power in regions where there is a surplus of fossil fuel and other forms of cheap power. Number two could be a lack of local incentives or a limited availability of local incentives. Smaller commercial scale projects also can't always absorb the same fixed soft cost as well as larger ones can. The second challenge hindering financing of commercial scale solar projects for nonprofits has to do with credit. For publicly rated entities or governmental entities that have raised bonds recently, financing solar is typically a non-issue. We are not referring to those types of customers, but for all of those that do not have public ratings or have limited access to audited financials. Without an audited financial history, many financing companies rely on utilizing collateral, which can be prohibitive for customers to pursue their financing options. Another challenge has to do with facility constraints, whether it be an old rooftop, old electrical equipment, limited available parking space. There can be tons of restrictions on the facility's ability to have the perfectly designed installation for that customer. And as I mentioned on the financing options slide, there are a host of different financing solutions, and obtaining third-party counsel to support agreement review and negotiation may not always be viable for nonprofits and governmental entities. And the last challenge I wanted to bring up has to do with the approval process. A lot of nonprofit and governmental entities have a host of different approval processes for completing projects. And financing companies have to have flexibility and the ability to understand and work within the bylaws and bylaw structure of different nonprofits in order to successfully complete projects. And now I'm going to hand it off to Steve, who is going to break down our PPA process and identify how we tackle those challenges head on, as well as go into those case studies I mentioned earlier. Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Joel. I'm going to move on now to addressing financing challenges, SCF's process. One of the first things that Joel mentioned was economic and market-driven issues. In the first step, we're going to gather the customer's utility info, and we are going to run that into a program called Energy Toolbase. Energy Toolbase is going to allow us to see exactly how much the customer is going to save from our solar array. At the same time, we will run a preliminary design, likely in helioscope, and that will allow us to get both the maximum amount of solar optimized for tilt and shading scenarios, and then see exactly how much we can save the customer. What we're going to do there is juxtapose the utility usage history with the solar resource data to see exactly how much the solar system is going to offset at different times of the day. And then Energy Toolbase allows the user to go in and check out what time of use options are most viable to the customer. So at this point, we are able to move on to the SCF proposal and term sheet issuance, execution, and diligence. So the term sheet is going to lay out the initial terms of the project. That's going to be the PPA rate, term, escalator, as well as the solar system that we are offering to the customer. And at this phase, we are comfortable with kicking off our diligence. So we actually deploy a significant amount of resources at this point to get phase 1 environmental studies complete, American Land and Title Association surveys complete, as well as complete a title report and get a title commitment. That's going to allow us to discern if there are any obstacles to us completing the project. That would include deeds of trust, any easements that we would need to move our arrays around or trench over. And then once we get all of that done, we have our term sheet executed, we will move on to a kickoff call with the customer where we will just chat about any specific needs that the customer has, any expectations that they have for the project. That will enable us to issue a PPA. As Joel mentioned before, we have trimmed our PPA down significantly, so the amount of legal resources and review that is required for PPA execution is diminished greatly. So then we move on to permitting and interconnection approval. This phase of the project, we are going to engineer the documents as well as complete the interconnection process with the utility and net energy metering as well. The permitting process with the authority having jurisdiction, that is going to be the city or county responsible for issuing a permit, is going to be in the 8 to 12 week range. Interconnection approval is about the same length time, and we can do those concurrently. So once we have a permit and interconnection agreement, we are able to move on to construction. Construction for a typical commercial and industrial project is going to take in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 months. Once that's done, we will call the authority having jurisdiction out for the inspection. They will vet the system, and we will move on to the utility approval process, where they also will come out and inspect the system, at which point we are able to turn it on, and the customer then realizes savings for the term of the agreement. Let's move on now to some case studies. This is the Sunnyside Unified School District located in Tucson, Arizona. The district-wide solar project was over 8 megawatts, and that included 24 sites, including 22 schools and administration facilities. The anticipated savings for the customer was only over $50 million for the lifetime of the system. That is the term of the agreement, followed by the lifespan of the system following any buyouts. The bid was awarded to Phoenix-based developer Sunrenew. They're one of our best development partners, and just wanted to take my hat off to them for a moment because they did a great job with coordinating with the 22 separate principals on this, getting the interconnection process approved with Tucson Electric Power, and building the system according to spec and in a manner that allowed the students, faculty, and staff of the Sunnyside Unified School District to have access to their facilities and parking for the duration of the installation. One thing that we did here was provided educational kiosks for each school. So these are essentially flat screen TVs that are located in the hallways, and they flip between the real-time production numbers as well as the historical production numbers. So each student, faculty, and staff member can have a look at the benefits that the solar system is providing at their school. As I mentioned before, there were 22 separate schools here, so we had to deal with 22 separate principals. All of them had different demands and expectations. Safety was of paramount importance to us, so we had to hire contractors that had vetted all of their employees. They did background checks and fingerprint checks on all of them. And we also worked with all of the principals to make sure that the students had access to the playgrounds, that their faculty had enough parking spaces. That generally required us to build each of these arrays at once. So they would build an entire array, move the fence, and go to a separate location. All of these issues that I'm mentioning would typically derail a project, especially of this size and scope. It's pretty difficult process getting title commitments, making sure that everything's in line, getting 24 separate interconnection agreements, and then also we were thrown a wrench with the steel and module tariffs that came out during the construction process. So it was a great accomplishment for SCF to be able to deliver the customer savings after encountering all those issues. Moving on to our next case study, this is the Dream City Church. They had 3 campuses located across Glendale, Scottsdale, and Phoenix. This one specifically, we were able to complete the financing with an extremely beautiful, incredibly robust structure called a power parasol. And this was located in front of their Phoenix location's worship center. And it provides a gathering place as well as an outdoor meeting area. And it was an extremely amazing installation, one of my favorite that we've done to date. Also had the carport canopies covering over 200 parking spots at both the Phoenix and Glendale locations. The Scottsdale location was just a roof-mounted system. Their facility there is a little bit smaller. Couple of the constraints that we had, construction could not hinder the facility use, so they had a few events planned, fireworks show over the 4th of July, a few concerts, as well as some events there. And we needed to work around that, and our contractor was more than capable of doing so. Um, we had to do another SSA because it was an Arizona project, so that's a state compliant solar service agreement as opposed to a PPA. Essentially, that transfers power ownership um, right when it's generated and provides that as a service as opposed to a direct sale. Let's move over to California, Central Valley specifically, and the city of San Joaquin. This project and or portfolio was 317 kilowatts total over 4 key government facilities: community center, city hall, public works, and water treatment facility. This one was pretty interesting project because a few of these systems were actually quite small. The public works and water treatment facility were able to absorb kind of the smaller projects that were significantly under 100 kilowatts. So this is really a testament to all of the documents that we were able to really parse down our standard agreements being quite a bit smaller than they used to be, as well as our internal development process where we can just review and approve projects and plans that have multiple different meters at multiple different sites extremely quickly. A couple of facility constraints that we had here. We had to do an energy audit on the pump station because it was under construction when we signed the PPA. So essentially what we did there is we looked at their future usage based on similar loads in other places, and we designed the system optimally so that it would not overproduce at the location, but it did offset about 90% of the electricity. Worked with the city planner, um, city council, as well as the city manager and their facilities representatives. Uh, they were a huge help in allowing us to discern any issues that were going to come up in the process quickly so that we could address them with our contractor. And that allowed us to generate savings for a very small agricultural community, again, with some extremely small facilities. So SCF's keys to PPA success. These are the items that have allowed us to get over 60 nonprofit projects over the line. Big one here is going to be reviewed, audited, and CPA compiled financials. SCF has the ability to finance unrated customers, so we will review the financials and run a risk assessment of our own, and that will allow us to provide terms to the customer that are commensurate with their credit rating. Again, doesn't need to be investment grade. Another thing here is the SCF diligence process. I'd mentioned this earlier, but we do kick that off once we have the term sheet signed, and that's a point when most companies are unwilling to do so because they do not have any visibility into whether or not the PPA is going to get signed, and so most companies are unwilling to deploy resources there. The simplified agreements are tremendous here for us. Getting that PPA under 20 pages, whereas the standard form is usually over 35 pages, absolutely huge. Getting the customer's legal counsel on board with signing the agreement and just making it a lot easier to read for customers. Gets a lot more projects over the line, and that is great news for everyone involved. All right, I am going to hand it back over to Joel. Joel, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Well, that about wraps up our presentation portion of the webinar. So if you're a prospective PPA customer and you're interested in learning more, you can reach us at scf.com/register. And if you're a solar developer or installer and you're interested in gaining access to the SCF suite, which is our free cloud-based PPA pricing software, you could register at suite.scf.com/register. With that, let's go ahead and transition over to our Q&A session. Thanks again for all of you that have stayed on to this point.
Steve, would you like to go ahead and take the first question?
Yeah, I have one here from Oman. It's talking about the Sunnyside Unified School District savings. So that one, we had a 20-year agreement. We do assume that there's going to be a 35-year lifespan for those solar panels. Their avoided cost was somewhere in the ballpark of 14.5 to 15 cents in Tucson Electric Power Territory. TEP has a significantly higher rate than the other larger utilities in the area, namely APS. And at the time, they were on a rate structure that they were grandfathered into that allowed them to have essentially no or very little demand charges. So in the event that they would like to buy the system out at the end of the term in year 20, they were going to have 15 extra years of solar production at their sites. That essentially made it so that they were going to save a lot of power on the tail end, but they were also saving a huge amount on their electricity at the start of the term because they had very good credit and they had a very large portfolio. So we were able to get the PPA rate down to the 9 cent range, and their avoided cost was in the 14 to 15 cent range, as I mentioned. So they were saving about 33% on all the solar energy that we produced from day one. Utility rates were also, the escalator for utilities was also higher than our SSA rate escalator.
Okay, I'll take the next question. What's the smallest size project you guys would like to provide a PPA for? So the smallest per our quick quote calculator is 100 kilowatts, although since about 2020, we highly recommend that the minimum system size be closer to 225 kilowatts. And our average install size in 2020 was about 800 kilowatts. So larger projects tend to yield more savings and bottom line dollar savings, so they tend to transact more effectively. Steve, why don't you bring up the question on the city of San Joaquin?
Yeah, it looks like we have one here from Loretta. It says that she has found that below 500 kilowatts, it's difficult to have savings. So city of San Joaquin was in PG&E territory. And one of the benefits that we actually had on this was that their meters were on very small rate schedules. And when the install occurred, it was mostly in 2016 and 2017. And they were on, again, very low demand structures. So basically, their avoided cost was in the ballpark of 23 cents for that one, and we were able to give them about 20% savings from day one, again, with a significantly lower escalator than what PG&E has. Their historical escalator rates are around 4 to 5%. In the last year, I believe they hiked it 8%. So yes, they have been saving money since we installed the systems there.
Okay, I'll take the next question. What is the software that we use for preliminary design and analysis processes? So we're software agnostic, but we tend to use some of the best industry best. So Helioscope we utilize pretty frequently for preliminary design analysis and production analysis. We also use PVSys as well in Cyton. And for our savings analyses, we use Energy Toolbase for pretty much all of our savings analyses. We are, comfortable utilizing multiple designs. We recommend in our data room of the SCF suite, there's the ability to upload a preliminary design of the project, so that way we can get the production analysis completed as early as possible. Yeah, we could definitely take a look at multiple different types of software. Yeah, so that's a good question. Steve, would you like to answer the question about from Paradise, California?
Just a moment.
Michael McAllister.
Yeah, Michael said we have a small, large building in Paradise, California, recently replaced roof from damage from a campfire. Interested in if we did this roof damage covered in the agreement. So one of the things that we do for roofs that have damage on them is we will do any mitigation work that is required to get the system up. And generally we want to have at least a 10 to 15 year roof lifespan after that. So we will do a roof condition assessment and have a professional roofer go out there, see exactly what we need to do to get that roof's lifespan up to 10 to 15 years. And then the contractor is going to be responsible for coordinating an effort to make that happen. After that, we will get a roof warranty. And then once the solar installation is done, we will have a roof warranty recertification where they come out and vet all of the seals and all of the attachments for that roof and make sure that there are no leaks. And after that, it will be covered under the roof warranty for generally 10 to 15 years. Sometimes it's longer depending on the roof manufacturer. If you're doing TPO roofs, which are those white kind of plastic-ish roofs that you see on larger office buildings and Walmarts and stuff like that, sometimes their warranties are in excess of 20 years.
Thanks, Steve. So Steve asked a question, what experience does SCF have financing microgrids and or solar plus storage projects? Is this something that you're interested in? That's a great question. So microgrid projects we have not completed, but solar plus storage is absolutely an area that we're experienced in, and an area particularly we're seeing a lot of growth in 2021 and beyond. So solar plus storage is most friendly for power purchase agreements in California because of the local storage incentive called SCHIP, Self-Generating Incentive Program. That alongside combined with the ITC that we can claim on the energy storage creates a comprehensive PPA that's a lot more resilient to future changes in utility curves and rate structures in California, which we know are coming down the line. And then other markets where there are energy storage adders, like in New York, Texas, and in Massachusetts, they can also be very attractive as well. Are there any specific carport manufacturers that you recommend, and any that you don't cover financing for? So I could speak to hardware across. So we use tier 1 equipment for all of our projects. We want to make our assets resilient and strong, and so we have manufacturers listed for our modules and inverters and energy storage providers on our SCF suite. For racking companies, you'd work directly with our operations team just to ensure that the specific carport manufacturer has a track record of success and is considered what we classify as tier 1. What are sizing requirements? I did from Chad. I touched base on this a little bit earlier, but for the minimum system size, we do recommend 225 or 250 kilowatts and up. You can always, if it's a single customer, you can always aggregate multiple sites. So if it's a school district, please try to use as many campuses as possible to make the project comprehensive across and generate more savings for the customer across as many meters as possible. And in terms of, are these PPA and financing options direct, or does the installer have to be certified to sell? That's a great question from Jim. These are not direct to sale. We will be kind of on hand to work directly with the customer and our developer partner to execute not only on the term sheet, but the power purchase agreement with the customer, as well as the engineering, procurement, and construction agreement with the solar developer installer. So that was a great question there. I'm just going to sift through. Steve, have you found a question that you'd like to take? I see a question from Andrew. So they just completed a 650 kilowatt rooftop array, and they were interested in a PPA to access the tax credits. the PPA ultimately wiped out the tax savings. In your experience, is there a sweet spot for this size that makes it more attractive? That's a great question. It's really market specific, as I kind of mentioned, as one of the major challenges to power purchase agreements. But as mentioned, 250 kilowatts is about as small as we would recommend. Projects that are over a megawatt, will always yield total dollar savings that exceed a smaller system like a 100 kilowatt project. So there are also benefits from economies of scale when it comes to equipment procurement, as well as our diligence cost assumptions that Steve mentioned that we take on for every single project. That can be spread over a much bigger project that's 1 megawatt versus a 100 kilowatt project. So we traditionally see that projects 500 kilowatts and up oftentimes pencil in a lot of markets. And then in markets like California, smaller projects can yield substantial savings as well. Steve, anything that catches your eye?
I think we've answered most of the questions here.
Okay. Wonderful.
Does anyone have any other questions they would like to ask?
I see one question, sorry, really quick, about Texas, and do we have a solar installer we can recommend for a customer? So we have a nationwide network of solar installers that utilize the SCF suite. If you want to reach out to us, you have my email address below. You can reach out to us and we could work with you to see if there's a solar installer that would be a good fit to work on that particular project. So feel free to shoot me an email. And with that, if there are any other Q&A questions that come through, we always add them to our FAQ section of the SCF suite. I provided the registration link in the previous slide. This recording will go out as well. But with that, I wanted to say thank you from Steve and myself and the whole SCF team. Thank you very much for joining us today. And we appreciate you spending the time, and we're really excited. If you have power purchase agreements that you'd like us to work with you on, we're happy to do so. And feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions that weren't answered at the time. So with that, thank you very much, and everyone have a great rest of your Wednesday.